Cradd, who's been a teacher trainer, academic manager, and English language teacher for over 20 years all over the world. Terrie's written and delivered many teacher training workshops, both online and face-to-face. Her training focuses on providing practical ideas and tips that teachers can use every day. Terrie is currently working as a teacher trainer for Oxford in Saudi Arabia, where she organizes training events for outside speakers and delivers specialized training programs for schools and universities. She's written a variety of bespoke training programs and is a consultant for syllabus design. She's also assisted universities in designing continued professional development programs. Terrie is Delta qualified and has an MA in teaching English to young adults. So over to you, Terrie. If you'd like to turn on your mic and camera, we'd be happy to see you and follow you now.
Thank you very much, Kieran, and welcome everybody to my teacher training session. It's this afternoon for me, so it's 2 o'clock, and the weather's fantastic, so I'm happy already. It's amazing to see how many of you have come to the session today from all over the world. So it truly is a global event, and I'm very excited about that. A big shout out to anybody coming to us today from Saudi Arabia, where I live. Maybe some colleagues, maybe some friends. So welcome to you as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a lot to get through today, and I don't want to leave anything out. So let's get started straight away, shall we? Okay, so we're going to be looking at learner agency today, and some of you may have attended other sessions where learner agency has been dealt with in some detail, but we will go back and think, what is learner agency in terms of secondary school students? And we'll also be looking at what our role as professionals, as educators, is in promoting learner agency. What do we expect from the students? What is their role in pushing learner agency? And of course, we'll be having a look at how we can actually assess that and how we can encourage our students to have more of a role in assessment as well. Okay, so first of all, my question for you. Hello, Kasim University. Andre, lovely to see you there. What is learner agency? Now, don't worry if you haven't attended any sessions about learner agency. You can either take a guess. For those of you who have, you probably know what it is already. So my first question is, in a short phrase, short sentence, what is learner agency? No problem if you don't know. It's about autonomy. No idea? You will by the end of this session, I promise. Good. Control is a very important, very important word when we talk about learner agency. Responsibility, I'm seeing, involvement, engagement, excellent. Autonomy again. Super. Thank you very much for that. So, this is taken from our OUP position paper, which will be available at the end of March, but I'll leave you a few seconds here to have a read through what learner agency is. Okay, don't worry if you didn't get a chance to really kind of go through this definition in, deeply, because obviously you're going to get the slides at the end anyway. So it's not the first and the last time you're going to see this. Okay, moving on. So we've got a definition. We know what learner agency is. And lots of the things that you suggested in the chat box are here in this definition. People mentioned control, creating opportunities to learn. But what I want to think about now is, we know what learner agency is, but who are our learners? So we're talking about secondary school learners here. The activities that I take you through today are relevant activities for secondary school students or adults, but I want to think specifically, just for the next few moments, about who our secondary school students are in terms of characteristics. So I'm going to suggest some characteristics to you about secondary school students, and I would like you to use the chat box and either put in a T for true or an F for false if you disagree with the statement. So let's go with the first one. Good point, Catherine. They can be university students too. Yeah. Teenagers. So by teens, I mean teenagers. Is this a true or false statement? Okay, so that looks like resoundingly a true statement. So we're talking about more abstract thinking, not as developed as an adult, but they're starting to get that way. They're starting to develop their critical thinking skills and their problem solving skills as well. I'm glad to see that you agree. Okay, how about the next statement? So this doesn't necessarily have to be confined to English. This could be the L1 as well, but it's this idea of them being better at manipulating language for arguing and asking questions. And I think I would suggest that the development of them questioning parents and teachers and peers may be more in some countries rather than others, depending on the culture. But I still think students at this age are developing their ability to think about things and question us and question their parents as well. Resoundingly true. How about the next one? We're talking about better at. Better at understanding the consequences of their behavior. So better at this self-reflection as well. Most of you are putting a true in there. I do appreciate you being so interactive in the chat box. Doesn't feel like I'm talking to nobody, talking to my window. So true. Great. That's fantastic. Another one. Again, this is about asking questions. So reflection, asking questions, developing autonomy, all things that we have mentioned as characteristics of learner agency. Okay, super. So that looks like a resoundingly true, some with exclamation marks as well. How about their friends? How important are their friends to them? And I think this is important when you think about them working together, collaborating together, peer correction, for example. Somebody's put a TTT. I'm guessing that means so true. Fabulous. Okay, what I wanted to do now then is loop that around. We've considered aspects or characteristics of teenage development. What I want to do now is go back to our definition of learner agency, and where what I've highlighted in red for you is where these characteristics fit very nicely with learner agency. And I guess what I'm trying to put across here is teenagers and adults as well are of optimum age to take advantage of learner agency. And that's why it's very exciting for teenagers as well, because they haven't had this necessarily had this sense of control and sense of being encouraged to question things, to question the teacher, to question what's going on around them. They haven't necessarily been given a lot of opportunities to be autonomous. So this is linking in to very, very kind of recent developments for them as teenagers. So that's why I think it's super exciting that we promote learner agency specifically for secondary students. I think it can be introduced way earlier than secondary, but I think once they get to teenagers, thank you, Bonnie, it's about empowerment, and they will suck up empowerment. They love it. Being given that extra sense of responsibility is actually extremely motivational for them. And we all know it is not always easy to motivate teenagers in the classroom. So, as I said, we're going to have a look now at what is the teacher's role, what are the students' role, what is it that we can do to promote learner agency. The first thing I wanted to point out about learner agency, about empowering students, about them encouraging them to be more autonomous, take more control over their learning. I think we would all agree that this is something that we want to promote. You seem to be fairly positive about it in the chat box. It can't happen on its own, if you know what I mean. So you're an institution, you're either in a school, you're in a university. It can't be just you that have decided by yourself or with one other teacher that learner agency is fantastic. This is what we've got to promote. Me and my friend, we're going to go forward and do it. It doesn't work like that. It needs to almost become a part of the culture of the educational institution. So in other words, you need buy-in from all stakeholders. So what I'm talking about here is buy-in from everybody in the staff room, buy-in from administration. So that's what we call it in Saudi, the administration. In other words, senior teachers or supervisors or head teachers or heads of school. And also, of course, if they are involved in their learning, which at secondary school and university they still are, we need buy-in from parents as well. It's teamwork, Tuba. Thank you very much. Everybody needs to be in agreement. And of course, with the educators in the field, on the ground, with the students, it's going to be our job to roll it out, let's say, but it's not going to work unless everybody's in agreement to it. So, for example, one way that it could happen, and I know that teachers don't like this suggestion, it could become part, for example, of a criteria in a lesson plan that a supervisor would come in to observe your lesson. You wouldn't necessarily, because it's a bit unnatural, you wouldn't necessarily have to demonstrate learner agency in that particular lesson that they're going to observe. Otherwise, it might be a bit unnatural. But definitely when you sit down with your senior teacher, head teacher, supervisor, peer, whoever it is that comes in to observe you, an explanation of how you're promoting learner agency. It may be, this is the area of learner agency I want to promote. I want to promote them taking more control of their learning. So they're going to make more decisions, for example, about how they practice listening. Last lesson, this is how I did that. This is going to continue into this lesson. And these are the activities that I'm going to do, so that we don't all talk about it, but actually that learner agency, there is some proof of it going on in lesson by lesson. And of course, what I think should happen is that it is incorporated into the curriculum or into the syllabus, so that it actually becomes a reality. Because I think sometimes what can happen with these sort of ideas is that we all agree on them, but actually putting them into practice is either something we think is a good idea, but it never really happens because we don't have the support from teachers around us or from the administration. So it's definitely a collaboration where all stakeholders need to be involved. And also, students need to go, they need to have their own learning goals, especially teenagers. So it's not going to be about us assessing students or testing students and deciding, okay, you're weak in speaking, you need to do X, Y, Z to improve. That's not empowering students. Yes, exactly. Student-centered learning. Thank you. Support from peers is crucial, and we're going to talk about that as well. Thanks, Maria. It's about our role as teachers to encourage learner agency through students setting their own goals. So that's going to be their role to set the goal, but they're going to need our support in doing that. And somebody mentioned in the chat box somewhere that we are the facilitators of that. But how are we going to do it? How are we actually going to put that into practice? And I think when we're encouraging students to set goals, they need to be, obviously they need to be smart, but they also need to be organized as well. And I'm going to show you one method that is possible to use. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the GROW kind of methodology of setting goals, but this was created by a man called Sir John Whitmore, and what he was actually a motivational speaker, and what he basically has is this model where you recognize what it is that you want to do. And I'll show you what that means in reality on the next slide. So this could be, what is it that you want to do? What's the area that you want to improve on? So almost like, what's the issue? What's the, not necessarily problem, but what is it that you want to get better at? What do you want to do well? Okay, so you've identified what that is. Probably that's going to be with the help of a teacher. It's very difficult if students sit down with a blank page and say, okay, what do I want to get better at? They usually need our support and our facilitation for that. Then what's the reality? So you've decided what it is that you want to do. So where are you at with that at the moment? What's the issue? Then we think about what options, and that's definitely where we can step in and say, okay, if this is the issue, these are the 4 different things that you could do about it. And then the will at the end is exactly what will you do? You've got those 4 options. Which ones are you going to choose? What are you actually going to do about it? And let me show you this model in more detail when we look at, for example, a student wanting to improve their speaking. So this is where it sort of comes into practice. So we have a student who wants to feel better, not a vague kind of, I want to improve, but they want to feel better about speaking. And the reality is it's a confidence issue. They're frightened. They think that the other students have better English than them. So now, what are their options? Make more of an effort, speak more outside of class to build more confidence. That's just 2 examples. That's not a definitive, the only thing you can do to be more confident speaking. And then what are they actually going to do? Ask the teacher for discussion topics, to prepare vocab, meet with more students by joining a speaking club. I would suggest what this lacks is a time frame. But it's a model that you could use to get students to set their own goals, which which is going to make them more confident and have more involvement in their learning. We all know, and you've mentioned student-centered, a few of you have mentioned student-centered, how important teaching is to be student-centered in the chat box there. What I think an important part of learner-centered teaching is that as professionals, we respond to what is going on in the lesson. So I think it's very easy, especially with the kind of teaching qualifications that we have, that we're super well planned. We know exactly what's going to go on in the lesson. We've got our course books with us, and that is what we carry out. I still think it's important to respond, however, to how the students are responding to that lesson. So one way that you could do this, an example was given to me by a colleague, is that they noticed their students were very interested in the video section of their course book, but not, so they enjoyed watching the videos, but not necessarily interested in the way that particular course book dealt with watching the videos, or let's say the activities that were linked to the course book. So an activity that I wanted to share with you, or a website, sorry, that I wanted to share with you is Tube Quizzard. And obviously this is part of the YouTube group. And this is something that my colleague used in class with her students, because as I said, they loved watching the video, but they were struggling to do some of the activities. Now the activities that go with Tube Quizzard are either based on grammar or vocabulary. And basically you go onto the site, it's all free, and the video clips that they watch are trailers. And as you can see here, it's a simple gap fill. So students watch the video, and as they watch the transcript, as they watch the video, they see the transcript of what the people are saying, and they fill in a gap. Nothing that you haven't seen before. What is different about this particular website is when they click on the gap, the video stops for them to write the answer in. What I found when I was teaching, and my colleague mentioned this as well, is that when the video is carrying on, the students tend to very quickly try to write in the gap fill. They don't care about the spelling. They're not figuring out what could that word be from the context of the paragraph that it's being used in, because of course the video continues so quickly that they're on to the next gap fill. So the beauty of this is once they've clicked on the gap, the video stops. They have as much time as they want to actually fill in that gap. And as you can see, I don't know if it's a little bit small here, there's a blue box at the end of the gap that says check. So again, whilst they're interacting with the gap and clicking on check, the video stops for them. What you could do is encourage the students to watch the video through first, all the way through, give them a GIST question to answer, and then get them to do the gap fill. But my friend noticed that the students, because they really enjoyed the video that she'd noticed in class, they actually did these activities at home by themselves without her having to nag too much. So don't worry if you haven't managed to write down that link, because you'll get the link later with the slides. So we've talked about some of the things that we can do to promote learner agency as teachers. What is the student's role? And I think this is important because many of you have talked about how this is time for the learners now to pick it up, take control, and be more autonomous. This links, my idea here, links to students having more control over the material that they interact with. And I'm going to show you an activity that students love and that they can do by working together as a community. And you've mentioned it's really important for them to work with peers, and we looked at characteristics of teenagers to how important their peer group is. So I want to show you now an activity that students can do together and something that they'll really enjoy. I don't know if you've come across this, but Plot Generator is a really fab way of getting students to be more on board with creative writing. I don't know how your students are, but the skill that Saudi students, and my Saudi colleagues will back me up on this, the skill that Saudi students dislike practicing the most is writing. One of the reasons they don't like it is they don't really know how to get started with it. So Plot Generator is basically a tool that helps students generate these ideas. So what you can do is get students working in groups of 2 or groups of 3. I'm glad to see it's a new one. And basically they are asked questions on Plot Generator. So for example, they will be asked to suggest a name for the main character. They will be asked to suggest a name for the sub-character. They will be asked, how does the main character and the sub-character, how do they know each other? And they have options there. They can choose their enemies, their best friends, it's boyfriend, girlfriend, not in Saudi. And basically, they are asked 10 to 15 questions. So they get to choose where does the story take place? Is it in the desert? Is it by the sea? What happens to the two characters? Do they fall out? They get the opportunity to describe the characters. Are they tall, short, male, female, colour of their hair? Once they've answered all of the questions, so they get asked questions about the plot as well, they click submit and the website will generate a story for them. And it's really motivating for them because they haven't had to put it all together themselves. Now, I'm not suggesting that I would use this all the time, because at the end of the day, we need our students to be able to write in English. But it's a really good way to get them started, because it's not too difficult for them. And also the stories come out quite fun, and because they've been generated by the students themselves, they get a lot more ownership of it as well. It's something worth trying out. It doesn't take long for them to do either. And it gets them motivated to write those stories. So that's an activity, an idea of an activity that gives students more control, and it's fun as well. And it increases creativity. Zoraya, what it also does is, for those students who don't really believe they're very creative, it helps them to generate a paragraph. Going on to talk about students working as a community, something else that I used to do when I was teaching more is getting students to help each other with their problems. And I don't necessarily mean, I don't know how to use the present perfect type of a problem, but it could be more, for example, I don't feel very confident speaking. I feel like everyone else is better than me. So what you do is you get students to anonymously, and that's very important, write down and submit a problem that they're having, with their English. Then once or twice a week, and any student takes one of the items from the box, and of course you can do this online as well, and they read it aloud to the rest of the class. Or you could set it up in breakout rooms as well, where one person in the breakout room reads it aloud and they discuss the problem. The class then, as a group, figure out the ideal way for them to solve that problem. This is super simple. It doesn't need any preparation from you. All the content comes from the students. I don't think necessarily right at the beginning you're going to get students being completely honest, but as with anything, if you continue to do it and students see other students writing down their problems that are probably very similar, it can encourage weaker or more shy students, especially as it's anonymous, to write down their problems. But the key is, as a community, they're solving each other's problems. So another area which we talked about, and some of you mentioned as well, is that students are at the age, and learner agency is also about them asking questions and generating ideas from asking those questions, and perhaps challenging existing ideas. So I want to show you an activity that you're probably quite familiar with, and this is the desert island activity. Most teachers throughout their career have done some form of a desert island, where you say to students, you're stuck on the desert island, and you can choose a certain number of items to save you. And basically that's what this is. So how this works is students individually write down 5 to 8 items that they want on their desert island. And you have to give them a scenario. So you could give them something like, it's fairly hot during the day, but it gets quite cold at night. There are no humans on the island, but you've seen a few ships go by. So you sort of feed in a story there. Individually, they choose their 5 to 8 items to have on the island to basically help them until they get rescued. And their items cannot be things like an aeroplane or a helicopter to get them off, because you do get them doing that. They're quite smart. Once they've written down their 5 to 8 items, you put them into a breakout room. So you put them in groups of 3, 4, possibly 4 in a breakout room. And then they put their lists together. So they've got a list of 4 different lists of items for the island. And then together they have to collaborate to choose a final list of 8 items. So this is not just about what do we need to survive, although that's important. It's not just about the language of negotiation. This activity, the way that I do it, is about how they work together. So you get them in the breakout room. They've decided on their 8 items. You bring them back into the main room, do some feedback on the items, but then comes in the questions, because I want the students then to reflect on this activity and think about how did they negotiate their final 8 items. I put them back into the breakout room, and I want them reflecting on their teamwork. And they often don't expect me to ask these questions. Usually during feedback, they expect me to, well, they hope that I'm going to praise them, tell them how interesting their ideas were. We'll work on some language items that I noticed, but they don't normally expect reflection on the task itself. It takes some time. You don't have to ask them all of these questions, select some of them, but you are really making the students think about how they succeeded in the task. The reflection part of it, Karen, is essential for me in terms of learner agency. I don't do this all the time with all my activities because it takes too long. But even if you just select 2 or 3 every time, you're getting them to reflect back on what they've done. Okay, moving on then to the last part of today's session, which is assessment, which is such a, well, assessment's always been important, but it's something that lots of teachers are very interested in. I'm just having a look. Monica's done the desert island. Okay, why they chose their items and how they would use them. That is a reflection in itself. Thanks, Monica. Of course, you can change the questions as well. So with learner agency, when we think of self-reflection or self-assessment, the focus needs to be on self-referential assessment. In other words, referring to what we've done. It's all about us here. So it's about highlighting what they're capable of, keeping it positive, not just focusing on what they can't do. We need students, especially teenagers and secondary school students, who have the propensity to focus on things that are negative generally. Sometimes they really need a nudge into, no, but this is what you did well, in order for them to A, realize it, and B, continue doing it. It's not just about what they can't do. And then focusing on, look at what you can do now that you couldn't do before. So maybe you have the students doing an activity that involves them using the present perfect, and they've got some knowledge of the present perfect, but they're not particularly good at using it. You have them doing an activity, perhaps it's a find someone who, about life experiences. Have you ever been to Italy, for example? They do the activity, they don't do it. There are some issues with it. You go in, you reteach it, or you get them to teach it to each other. They do it again, and then that's it. Bam, you focus on the second time they do that activity, and you say, look how well you did it. You could even get them to record it. You could do it before, but look how much better you can do it now. So really getting them to think about what they can do themselves. Self-assessment, exactly. And it's about encouraging students to persevere. It's about encouraging a growth mindset that I think teenagers are perfectly capable of having, but can go down that route of, I'm no good at this, I can't do it, so bam, I'm not even going to try. I don't feel confident about speaking, I'm going to shut it off. I'm very good at grammar, I'm very good at writing. Speaking's just not my thing and it never will be. We don't want to encourage that fixed mindset. We want to encourage students to believe that they can do. So it's this can-do mentality. That refers, the reason I'm showing you this, it refers back to setting those goals as well. That Sir John Whitmore suggests. So once they've set those goals with you, then they can reflect back and actually think, how have I realized those goals? And it's about students being able to self-correct what they've done as well. We want students to take risks, and that's part of that growth mindset. Okay, I can use the present perfect a little bit. I'm going to try using the present perfect again for this assessment. It's not going to be perfect, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to try. I'm going to take that risk. By risk taking, making some mistakes is where the deeper learning comes in, and getting students to figure it out by themselves. That's a lot more motivating than when they hand in work to us, we mark it, we give it back, and that's it, it's done. It's about giving them the confidence that they can do it themselves, they can make a mistake, but they can figure that out, and they can do something better than they could do it before. And what I wanted to show you here is to remind you, this is actually taken from Q Skills 2nd edition. This is the Saudi version, but the international version as well. You will find in all good course books, at the end of a unit, or even it could be halfway through a unit, you'll get these checklists. So this one here actually shows us the vocabulary that they should have learnt during the unit, but more importantly, the box, the purple box at the bottom, will show the sort of what they are supposed to be able to do by the end of that unit, and they tick that off. This sort of can-do approach fits very well with the growth mindset, and it's not new. It's something that's been around a while. Self-confidence is so important. It's so important in life as well. Very much so. So moving on with assessment, thinking about peer correction as well. And I think some of you will probably recognize the 3 bullet points here from 21st century skills. So this idea that they are collaborating together to peer correct, they're cooperating together, and of course they're going to be communicating to lead to greater confidence. What's missing here, of course, is creativity, but you could say that that's involved in there as well. I'm a firm believer that when they're collaborating, which I think is great for teenagers, when they're communicating, they're using English. We're in the business of teaching and communicating, so it all fits together so well. Another activity, my last activity that I wanted to share with you today is Edwordle. And this is an excellent activity for students to work together, but also an activity, a website that students can use by themselves. But what I like about Edwordle is it's extremely versatile. So you'll notice the word clouds at the bottom. You can cut and paste text onto Edwordle, and then it will generate word clouds for students, which you can resize, recolor, you can move them around, you can do all sorts of pretty things with them. But I think, yes, it is like Mentimeter, but I think what is important about Edwordle is the different things that you can do with it. So if you think about it, you've got a text and you've generated a word cloud of words. So it's really good for revising texts. So what I have heard teachers say that they do is they've got a text, they cut and paste it into Edwordle, they generate the words. This can be a text that they've used a couple of weeks before. Without showing the students the text, the students just see the words, and then they have to remember, using those words as a trigger, what the text was. They don't have to rewrite the text, but they can just write some notes about the text to trigger what they, excuse me, to trigger what the text was about. Of course, students can save the word clouds and build up a bank of words that they can use to revise for, especially good for exams and quizzes. What you can do is use Edwordle before you introduce a text. So you can generate the word cloud and then say to the students, okay, have a look at these words. I want you to predict what you think the text is about, which is something that we do all the time, but doesn't it take ages to pick out those words from a text to give to students to do a prediction? You could also use them for vocabulary. So generate the word cloud and then get students to look up any new words. So that again is encouraging them to be autonomous. What I have heard people do with them is a dialogue reconstruction. So it doesn't have to be just a reading text as such. It could be a dialogue. So they've either generated their own dialogue, and you could have them swap dialogues, or they've read a dialogue and you want them to start using that dialogue. And instead of reading it out or memorizing it, they just get the word cloud from the dialogue and they have to recreate the dialogue from that. So it's just a trigger. I have heard of teachers using it for personal information. So basically, the students write a paragraph, like a biodata it could be, about themselves. They turn it into a word cloud, and then teachers make those word clouds available for using Google Docs, let's say, make those available to everyone without the student's name on, and then the students have to guess whose word cloud it is. So you can really kind of personalize it in that way as well. So what have we had a look at today? We're doing quite well for time as well. That makes me happy. We've had a look at what learner agency is, and for those of you who were unfamiliar with it, I hope that you are more familiar with it now. I'm sure the concepts of learner agency are not new to anybody. We've thought about what our role is as a facilitator. We've looked at some activities that we can do to help students to set goals and build a learning community. We've looked at the students' role in terms of what they can do together as a community, thinking about problem solving and thinking about asking questions. And we have also delved in a little bit to assessment as well, and thought about how important it is to keep that positive, to get students involved and to get students doing that in groups as well. I have one more thing to share with you before I look at your questions. The ideas that I have taken for this session today, apart from the activities, those were mine. The ideas are taken from an Oxford University Press position paper, which, as you can see from this screen, is going to be available at the end of March from our website. So you've got the address there for it. And that will give you a lot more detail about this kind of lifelong investment in learning and kind of nurturing confident students. I like that idea of nurturing. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left.
You've got 9 minutes, Terry, so plenty of time. Thank you very much.
Let's have a look at any questions we have. We have no questions, but hello. Am I right, Kieran? Are there questions?
Yes, we do have questions. If you just click on the Q&A tab instead of the chat, and then on published, you can take your pick. Plenty to keep you going.
Okay, great. So just give me a second to have a look through some of these then. Okay, so Ali is talking about students that register, sign up, and then they think there's some magic chip. I think learner agency can help here, Alia, especially if they're teenagers, because I think that the thing about learner agency is everybody. As I mentioned before, we've got our stakeholders, we've got the students, we've got the parents, we've got the administration, and of course we've got the teachers. Students are going to need learner training in learner agency. So once we've got our heads around it, once we've got ideas about how we're going to promote it, it's not that we can just go, right, everybody, we're going to do some learner training and you're just going to love learning English because it's empowering. It's about drip feeding bits of it in. So if you introduce them to an activity such as Tube Quizard, they really enjoy it and they love it. And then you do you introduce some ideas about why that is promoting learner agency, how that is them practicing their listening by themselves. If you give them a variety of fun activities that they can do to improve in certain areas, it's about them picking them up and being able to improve themselves by themselves as well. I'm just going to go down. I hope that helps. Feruz, learner agency, giving them voice and choice. Yes, thank you. I love that. A highly unbalanced class, weak, average, and strong students. It's a very good question, Feruz, but hopefully I answered that in the last question a little bit. Students, as well as us, need to be aware of where their weaknesses are, and it's not usually a surprise for them. And that doesn't have to be through constant testing, which I don't think necessarily flips up where the strengths and weaknesses are. It certainly isn't going to if it's an issue of confidence over speaking, for example. But once they have, with your help, identified the areas that they want to improve in, not that they're not good at, areas that they want to improve in. So in other words, here's where I'm at, the grow model. Here's where I'm at the moment. That's where I want to be. I want to be more like Maria, who just speaks and she doesn't worry so much about it. I'm going to implement the grow model in order to get there. So they need to know where, not the end of the road is, they need to know where it is they're going to, what they're aiming for. And then it's about giving them, guiding them, because I do think that is our job, guide them with various activities that they can use to do that. You may give them 4 different ways of improving. They try 2 and they don't like it. That's absolutely fine. That didn't suit them. Try the other 2. The ball's in their court to use an activity that suits them best to improve. But I think we can help them by choosing activities or helping them to find activities. Okay, warm-up activities. I would say anything, I can't give you examples right now, but I would say anything that is short, sweet, fun, and energizing. Anything that they like doing. It doesn't necessarily, for a warmer, have to relate to the lesson. Jackie, do you have any ideas for getting students to keep their cameras on? Coming from Saudi, this is a perennial problem, and it's something that I've learned to live without. Even though there is segregation here, many females don't want to have their cameras on, and that's absolutely fine. It's would help if I could see their mouths moving with lower levels sometimes, but it's not a necessity for me. Learner agency and learner autonomy are very closely linked, Jane, and I would say that learner autonomy is included under the umbrella of learner agency. It's one of the areas. Encouraging students in an online lesson. Try some of the activities that I mentioned today. I think if you pepper the lesson with fun activities and get students to give you feedback on those activities as well. I think, Hend, you don't entrust students with their learning goals. You facilitate the learning goals with them. It takes time. They don't necessarily know how to do that. You want them to work with you on it and work with each other. Grow is for emphasizing relevance over engagement. That's interesting, Andre. It's Andre. I might have a chat with you about that later. See me in my office. Okay, I will get back to you. Jacqueline, just let me go through. There are quite a lot here. When do you sit with them? Can you do it with a class of 15 to 20 students? Absolutely, because once the students have understood, some students will be self-sufficient. Once you've shown them the growth model, the grow model, some of them will be able to identify, encourage it, that they can sit and think of the areas that they want to improve in. They won't all need your help to do it. Some of them will already know where they want to get to, how they're feeling at the moment, and maybe they just need a peer to help them with some options of getting there. So I get them to try to do it by themselves, then compare with a peer who might have some advice to give them as well, and then jump in at the end if they need you. You might find that there's not that many of them that actually need you then, and you can deal with the 20 students. They're going to have different goals, Elena. That's why outside of class, they're going to be doing different activities in order to improve in what they need. So I think some of the problem with homework is everybody gets the same homework. Not everybody needs to improve their vocabulary or their listening skills. If the students have identified their weakness, then okay, Maria, you're going to practice listening. Sarah, you're going to go away and look at this website for writing. So in other words, they're all doing different things outside of class. I would say portfolio plus formal assessment, Hiroko, if that helps. No, I don't think they do. Kitslali. Sorry, that sounds like I haven't said that right. No, I don't think you get performance reports. Tube Quizard isn't about a performance report. It's not a performance report for me to see what they've done. It's an activity for them to improve themselves, and they get to check their answers. It's practice, but it's fun. Yeah. Andre, do we need to give more thinking time to students to get answers? Yes, and I think we've discussed this before in online sessions. It's a slightly different question from what we're dealing with today, but my thoughts are, having been a student, an online student, I did a course with Oxford recently, I was surprised as a student how much longer I needed, and this is my first language, obviously. Is it possible to incorporate the GROW model? Good question. That's
Terry,
what...
that's a good question. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to answer it because we're running out of time. Sorry
No,
to be so rude and interrupt you.
No,
okay.
That's absolutely fine. Just trying to get through as many as I can. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much to everybody for being so interactive in the chat box. I've really enjoyed working with you today.
Great, and we thank you, Terry, and I can see that there's an incredible expression of thanks in the chat box as well. There are teachers that are going to incorporate certainly all of that training into their teaching. There was one expression of thanks, I think it was thanks an ocean. So I love that one, and I want to start using it myself. So we can certainly see wonderful appreciation from all of the teachers here today. So we're coming to the end of our session now. Just to remind you, if you're registered for the next session, you'll automatically be taken to the landing page. You can simply join. You'll find us all waiting for you there. If not, just refer back to the email for the confirmation that you got for that session. Click onto the link, and you'll get in, and we'll be there ready to give you any help that you need. So thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.